and welcome to TGCon. And this is our cross-functional collaboration panel. I have just a few housekeeping notes that I wanted to mention. First, we think you'll have the best viewing experience if you click into theater mode. Also, I'd like to encourage you to join the conversation in the chat box, which is next to the screen, and participate in any of the polls. That's the next tab over from the chat box. I'd also like to invite you, if you have any trouble with audio or video today, please use the support function. That's in the upper right-hand corner of the platform. You can click support and then get help, and we should be able to help triage any of the problems that you have. One thing that you might want to try first is just refresh your screen. That seems to resolve a lot of issues. Some people also need to clear their cache or use the Chrome browser. Those are the best ways to make sure that you can resolve any issues. But feel free to use the get help function if that doesn't resolve it. Let's jump into our topic now. I'm going to hand it over to Bob Hudson. Bob, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. And welcome to our customer panel session on how TraceGains enables cross-functional collaboration at food, beverage, and also dietary supplement companies. Today, we're going to hear from the QA groups at 3 companies on how their immediate teams are benefiting from their TG implementations, but then how other departments outside quality assurance are leveraging the wealth of information that TG generates. My name is Bob Hudson. I'm Strategic Account Manager here at TraceGains, and I'm your moderator for this panel. A significant challenge that many companies face is that functional groups like R&D, procurement, regulatory, and quality are often siloed by both their organizational structure as well as the information that they use and have access, information systems, I should say, that they use and have access to. So when it comes to accelerating new product development or resolving regulatory issues, perhaps ensuring that we're only buying materials from currently qualified suppliers, these siloed groups need access to information such as ingredient research claims, data from certificates of analysis, and other existing materials. So there's a lot of value from being able to generate ingredient profiles and performance metrics within TraceGains applications like supplier management, supplier compliance, and some of the others, and then being able to have that other groups leverage that information as well. Okay, so let's look at some of the common benefits that we're going to talk about today amongst our panel, starting first with quality and regulatory. And so there's a lot of extensive labor savings, ability to redeploy human capital, and second, with the automated analysis of questionnaire responses, especially with the maturity and the growth of the TraceGains Standard Forms program today, it's making it also so easier to get information and analyze information automatically, and then utilize that information for determining risk profiles, prioritizing audits based upon risk analysis and things of that nature as well. Other departments benefit as well. So, for example, procurement, 24/7 one-click access. They can get information that they don't have to go calling somebody in QA or regulatory anymore to get that information. And so they can start managing suppliers and supplier issues by exception. And then lastly, we have Market Hub. So there's up to almost 35,000 supplier locations. I think we're in about the 34,000 range today. And then lastly, R&D. When considering R&D, there's comprehensive data risk and profiles on each supplier item combination in the supplier management database for your existing products. So if we're reformulating a material, a current product, or we want to create a new one from scratch, some of the things that Gary Nowacki talked about in the intro speech today, you have instant visibility to information. So if there's an allergen that's an allergen in the EU but not in North America, and it impacts how we're gonna or where we're gonna ship a particular product to, we have that information. So really, we're saving organizations like R&D hours, if not days, to determine particular circumstances. And then, of course, Market Hub with over 250,000 searchable items that we can look for at this point now. So let's meet our panelists. First up will be Jenny McClintock. Jenny is from Smucker pretty much a household name with thousands of brand products in both food and pet food. Second, will be Megan Kane from Lassonde Industries. Now, Lassonde, you've probably not heard of. It's not quite such a household name as Smucker, but they are the leading fruit and vegetable beverage manufacturer in North America. So we're looking forward to hearing from them. And then last but not least is Megan, is Mega Foods, and the team of Kat Palmer, as well as Kaylee Bates and Marcy Kugel from their quality and procurement group will be speaking about what they're doing in the world of dietary supplements. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jenny.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. As Bob mentioned, I'm from Smucker. At Smucker, we're using trace gains in a couple of different ways to manage through our cross-functional teams and use trace gains to help us enable collaboration across the tool. As a little background on Smucker, we are a $7.8 billion company in fiscal year 19 with over 7,000 employees that work across our manufacturing facilities as well as our corporate office and sales staff. We are recognized in the Fortune 500 again this year. Our purpose is to feed connections that help us thrive. Life tastes better together. We've adjusted our purpose a little bit as we've expanded from just a consumer goods food company, the well-known name of Smucker. We have Jif products as well. We have coffee, but we expanded into animal products with the acquisition of the Big Heart Pet brands. So we adjusted our purpose a little bit so that we could convey the need of our customers beyond just human meals and moments. We have 15 food manufacturing facilities, 7 pet food company locations, manufacturing sites, as well as 3 coffee plants in both the US and in Canada. We've deployed trace gains across all of our manufacturing sites as part of our receiving facilities and their approved supplier lists. When we think about our collaboration tools, the first that I wanted to share with you is around how we manage our approved supplier list. The first piece that when we were implementing trace gains that was important to us was that we be able to implement a process that would work for our 3 different business units in coffee, pet, and human foods. And we had some existing process that included a cross-functional approval process with R&D, purchasing, our supply quality team, and in many cases, our co-pack QA team as well. So as we worked to implement that in trace gains, we needed a way to document and track the status of those new supplier and item supplied approvals. We do that in trace gains through some workflows that notify folks as there are changes within that workflow process. And I'll have a screenshot in just a moment to show you a little bit more about what that looks like for us. It makes it easy for us as in our project managers to see the status of those approvals and how they impact our projects, because they're able to go in and see, is it waiting for R&D approval? Are we waiting on the supplier to provide documents? Or are we doing some tests that require us to take a little bit more time to get that approval completed? The system does give email notifications to the entire team when we first initiate a project, as well as when those projects are completed. Another thing that we added as part of our approved supplier list was a notification to our impacted receiving facilities when there's a change to their approved supplier list. So if we were to change either by approving or even removing an approved supplier, item supplied in their approved supplier list for one of our receiving facilities, then we have notifications to the receivers in those facilities as well as our QA team to let them know that there's been a change in that receiving approved supplier list. It helps keep communication open about our disqualified suppliers so that we don't have a risk in receiving materials from a plant that isn't approved. Here's an example of what our new supplier approval workflow looks like. We've added a few, as you can see, there are columns in this that include the different reviewer types within our workflows. You can see if someone's approved or not approved. We have dates around this about when things are required to be completed. You'll also see On the right-hand side of the screen, status awaiting approval and supplier docs awaiting approval, we pulled in a derived field so that for the team members that are responsible for reviewing documents as part of these new item supplied projects, we have an easy way to see the status of, is there something there for me to do before I move forward in that project. We also pulled in the document types that were missing, so that we could easily pull a report and send that off to a salesperson that maybe isn't working within TraceGains of what it is that we're waiting on. Another area that we have implemented some cross-functional workflows to help with collaboration with TraceGains is around how we're managing bioengineering update for labeling. The first thing that is happening for us on that is we're working with our regulatory team to evaluate all the raw materials used in our ingredients that are in human food products that are sold in the US. As you can imagine, there's a lot of finished product labels that may be impacted and need to be updated. And that all cascades back into, do we have the documentation from the suppliers with the updated information based on the BE guidance? So we developed a workflow within TraceGains using and pulling information from the suitability form that have specific information on the BE questions to help us identify which ones we still needed updates from our suppliers, as well as communicate the status between our regulatory team and our supply quality team as we follow up with suppliers about outstanding questions with that. So we have a workflow with that, as well as some email notifications that we put in place. And I'll show you a screenshot of that in a moment. The last place that I wanted to talk with you about where we do some cross-functional collaboration in TraceGains is around our supplier item ID change workflow. I'm not sure if you're aware, but your suppliers do have the capability to change the item number, their supplier ID, item ID, and TraceGains from their side as they accept the connection with that item. That caused us a little bit of heartache at Smucker because there was one occurrence where we found that a supplier had changed the item ID and we didn't know it. And that ended up causing us some concerns around the allergens included in that material and the way that we use the material in our plants and the declarations we make on finished product. So what we did is we added a workflow that helps us identify when things are changed on that supplier item ID and then notify our supply quality team to look at that, investigate it, and accept it before we're further down the road and have a negative impact of food safety and quality of our products. So back to the BE status, here's an example of what we've done in TraceGains. We created a BE workflow attribute that pulls together, you have to go in and change the status basically of this item supplied based on if we've gotten a BE document and it's been reviewed by the supply quality team. When that is changed as SQA reviewed, it sends an email to our regulatory team who are working against evaluating the BE status of those materials. If the regulatory team were to review that and find they had additional questions about that item supplied suitability form or country of origin form, they can set that status to SQA investigate, which then sends an email to the SQA owner so they know that they need to go follow up on that specific item. With 1,000 or more items that we're managing through for this update, it helps us know which ones we really need to focus in on and do some follow-up with our supplier. The last piece, so here's the screenshot of the supplier item ID changelog that I mentioned. What we did was we created a new attribute for supplier ID update, supplier item updated by, and the supplier item updated date. And then we used a workflow to help us identify in the audit history when those things changed. So what we do is it identifies when the supplier item ID is updated by someone that does not have a jmsmucker.com email address, which means that the supplier has changed that supplier item ID. And it kicks it into this dashboard for us, as well as the email notification to the SQA owner so that we can go in and take a look. Was the supplier item ID changed because it's a new item and we just didn't have it populated or it wasn't correct when we set the project up? Or was it an item that we've been using for a long time that we need to evaluate the change to make sure there's not a risk in the change of that material to our products or our finished goods. I'm happy to share more information about what we've done to manage through any of these workflows in the Q&A session or after, but that's all that I have prepared for today.
Give me just a moment and I'll switch the controls over to the next speaker.
My name is Megan Keene. I'm the Ingredient Quality Associate Manager for Lassonde. A little bit about Lassonde. We're a private label and branded beverage manufacturer with our home base out of Canada. The company was founded in 1918, and in its 100 years, we've grown to encompass 25 brands across 5 divisions, and we have an extensive production network across both Canada and North America, or Canada and the United States. I myself have been with the company for 4 years, and we've been using TraceGains for about the last 3 of them. And we started with utilizing the supplier management and the supplier compliance modules. When we started with TraceGains, we incorporated 2 of our divisions, Lassonde and Lassonde Pappas. Once we got the supplier management module set up, we started to incorporate Lassonde specialties. And now that we're growing more, we're incorporating more divisions into the system. In this past year, we've been working on adding in Old Orchard and Sunright brands. And what I want to talk about is kind of the way we manage cross-divisionally and cross-department within TraceGains. So kind of how we do cross-divisions in the system is we separate our suppliers out by brokers and locations. They each have different supplier IDs, and the supplier ID is shared across all the divisions. And having that helps avoid the multiple upload of documents for the suppliers. We keep our legal documents and everything under the broker location, and manufacturing documents go to the actual manufacturing sites. When items are set up, the first division that requests the item to be created will determine which division's item ID that will get. But as more divisions start to use the same ingredients, we've created these columns, one for each division, and when they create their own part numbers, we input it in there so all divisions can see who shares ingredients. And this is also set up in the same format in Spec Management, so we can keep one spec for each division and not have duplicate specs across divisions and across the system. We've started to get other departments at Lassonde to start utilizing TraceGains more and more. Our purchasing team, we've created specific dashboards for them to show ingredients that are approved for purchase. They have access to the supplier scorecards that gives them the easy reporting for our problem suppliers. So when we have a supplier that's missing a lot of documents, we'll send them that scorecard and ask that they reach out, and it kind of helps to start a conversation. Also, using this tool has led to increased communication between our QA and purchasing groups to help get a better streamlined process. They're looking more and more in TraceGains first before they purchase things to make sure everything's approved, including us on the purchasing emails to the suppliers so we can start the conversation if documents are needed. In our manufacturing facilities, we've created dashboards to help our plants with SQF audits. They're able to look up any type of information the auditor will want. So approved ingredient lists, supplier contact lists, they have easy access to those through the user-defined dashboards. Plants are easily allowed to pull any type of documents they would need for on-site audits, organic certifications, anything like that. And soon they're going to start utilizing the COA portion. Right now we're in process of starting to zone COAs into the system. So once we've completed that, we're going to train our facilities on using the COA monitor in TraceGains. Co-manufacturing is another group we've recently added into the system. We're doing this as kind of setting up our co-mans like suppliers. So we're creating a new supplier group, and we call them co-manufacturer. And we also started their supplier IDs a little bit higher to kind of keep them separate from our ingredient suppliers and ingredient documents. And I created specific dashboards and documents for their document approvals so they kind of have their own system. The visibility of documents within TraceGains has been a real asset to our regulatory team. This team's in charge of both non-GMO and organic certifications, so we've created specific dashboards to help them with those audits and to make it easier for them to find documents they may need or to sort out statuses of different supplier organic or non-GMO documents. During new product development, R&D has been using TraceGains to access any of the supplier ingredient documentation. So once our customers approve a new item is when we start getting all of the ingredient documentation and set up the supplier. And having this information in the system for them is making it a lot easier. And we've recently transitioned into the Spec Management module from a homegrown IT system. And it's allowed for more consistency and visibility in our ingredient specs across our divisions. So what we did, we have a dashboard, for example, down here. This one is for lead. We're able to see, this one's lead and arsenic, I'm sorry. We're able to see how we have that information set on our specs across different items. That's really all I have. So I'm open to any questions. If anyone needs more information, just feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Great. And I wanted to just mention that, remind folks that if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box now. And also we have poll questions that you can participate in during the presentation. And now I'm going to pass controls over to our next speaker. Kat, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. All right. I want to start by telling you a little bit about who we are. We're a small vitamin and supplement company. We envision a world without nutritional poverty, a planet where everyone is truly nourished. We don't just work with any farm, we work with like-minded farmers and use our collective power for good, advocating for organic and regenerative farming along the way. We're a B Corporation, so we cultivate a community of transparent suppliers. We work to enable a thriving workforce and supporting businesses, communities, and programs that share these same goals and values, all for a healthier, more sustainable, and more resilient future. We're really obsessed with quality. We source ingredients from all over the world. We use the SIDI protocol to approve our suppliers. And if you're not familiar with that, the primary goal of the Voluntary Standardized Information on Dietary Ingredients, which is SIDI protocol, is to streamline the communication of information on dietary ingredients from suppliers to the manufacturers. So we carry over 8 certifications, which all in all, you can tell we have a very complex systems of raw materials. So I'll hand it over now to Kaylee, who will share how TraceGains has helped us with managing this complexity.
Thanks, Kat. Our topic of discussion today will be something that is rather close to many of us, COVID-19. In the beginning, our sourcing team responded to the pandemic early and quickly, leaving our team with many new ingredients to approve. In fact, we actually tripled the number of ingredients between March and July. And it's not just approving any ingredients, though, because they have to fit specific criteria for different departments. For example, R&D was looking for ingredients with tight physical, analytical tolerances based on the sort of materials that would make a good tablet. In our business, we required consistent and small particle sizes, low moisture levels, and low lead to meet Prop 65 for California. We also use somewhat niche and hard to find materials as we borrow inspiration from traditional medicines around the world to bolster our formulas. But on the other hand, regulatory needed ingredients to meet preconceived label claims. So it's no good finding an alternate source of an ingredient if it doesn't match what we're already using. Details such as extract ratios and even plant species matter because we want to try and be as detailed as we can on our labels. We also have 4 different third-party organizations requiring specific paperwork that we have to track during the approval process. And it's really easy to lose track of which organizations have already reviewed a new ingredient or not. And meanwhile, quality still has current ingredient documentation to review and approve. What has helped us tremendously is that we've started referring to what we call the single source of truth. Before, our different organizations would each have their own storage place for documents, each of which was secreted away in nested folders or in Google Drives. No one organization had access to everything. The most accurate form a department had may not have been the most up-to-date form out of all of them, particularly when individual departments might reach out themselves to a supplier for a specialized document. Additionally, it was sometimes a struggle to receive updated forms in a timely fashion, and our requirements would create large stacks of paperwork. Ingredient packets could be anywhere between 40 and 140 pages of information. It was very difficult to slog through, which made finding the information regulatory and R&D wanted a challenge. Working with TraceGains, we've actually found that we're able to streamline the information considerably. Something as small as just having the file type standardized was huge in locating that one small piece of data you're looking for. You can see here how the file names have to do with vegan requirements, but the file type makes it very clear that we have a no animal testing statement, which we need to provide to our vegan certifier. So now our teams all have the same most up-to-date document, all with equal access. Something I would like to stress at this point is that we started with TraceGains at the end of 2019, and we really only got it set up and running sometime in March, when we began to train other departments on the program. This program was really new to our team when COVID-19 first became an issue, and even as we were learning the ropes, our sourcing team was able to gather data on these ingredients faster than before, which led to faster turnaround times for qualities document review. Our process was really cumbersome. Any new ingredient that we qualified required a full review, regardless of whether we were currently working with the supplier or not. It would necessitate a full review of all supplier documents so that all the relevant information would be contained in one packet. The use of TraceGains standardized forms is helping reduce the overall data that we need to re-review, but it's also putting our most critical information in one location. And one of the first things we did when setting up TraceGains was ask how to show off which of our suppliers were compliant to 21 CFR 117, as we ourselves look to become compliant to food, not just dietary supplements. Trace stations highlight the information that we ask for each other most often, as you can see below. We're no longer dependent on email chains with dozens of replies. Sometimes brand new suppliers or new ingredients didn't work out in the piloting stage. So we're able to leave notes on ingredients with the exact reason an ingredient was unsuitable. R&D sometimes wants to know whether an ingredient has passed lab testing, and regulatory often wants to see whether the ingredient has been evaluated by our non-GMO certifier. We're able to keep everyone in the loop at once, and you can see a snapshot here where we track when in-house testing has been completed and the results of our kosher certifier's review. Okay? One of the things we truly love about TraceGains is that you get out what you put in. The customization of the system allowed us to easily answer our most common questions. As you can see from previous slides, we really love colors. Colorful statuses has been invaluable in tracking ingredients and figuring out where in the approval process each one is. We can tell that an ingredient isn't on our approved supplier list yet because it's due for piloting, or because it's still in change control meetings or the documentation is still being gathered. Previously, we had one enterprising person from sourcing keeping an eye on raw materials in Google Sheets. Each ingredient was painstakingly tracked to a schedule, and now we've learned to upload our ingredient approval form and have TraceGains track these dates for us using its expiring documents feature instead, as you can see below. In our custom trace station from earlier, we actually have locations for the system to stamp the ID of the person who approved the ingredients, whether it's someone from quality or regulatory or R&D. The more info our teams need to know, the more dashboards we create. We currently have dashboards for country of origin, a dashboard for regulatory to track certification statuses, and one to track the approval process of new raw materials for R&D. The more we use TraceGains, the more gaps we find in our process that we're able to improve through TraceGains functionality. As we grow and learn, we're finding that TraceGains is growing with our team. I'm going to turn it back over to Kat to talk about some of our recent success stories.
All right, so we thought we would leave you with a few success stories that we've had. And really, we only launched just this year, so it's pretty neat. So the first one is one of our suppliers in India shut its facility down and we no longer could source an ingredient from them. Our team identified an alternate organic form of this ingredient, but we had to quickly qualify it based on availability. And it turned out this new supplier was already in TraceGains, so we were able to collect all the documentation very quickly and approve the new supplier. Another example is during a new product launch, one of our co-manufacturers, who is not a TraceGains customer, was struggling getting supplier information. So it really put our timeline at risk. R&D reached out to our quality team. We looked inside the TraceGains Market Hub and located all the documentation the co-man needed, all within 24 hours. And a last example, in the midst of our implementation of TraceGains earlier this year, we barely had a few suppliers set up. We were audited for our organic certification, and the auditor noticed one of the documents in our system was expired. We took a long shot. We peeked at TraceGains, and not only was the supplier set up, but they had also posted the latest version, thus satisfying our auditor on the spot. So that's it for us. Same as Megan and Jenny. If you guys have any questions, we're very happy to answer them.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. We're running a little bit over, but we have a few minutes here, and I have a couple questions for the panel, and then I know we have a few in the chat as well, although maybe they've been answered in the chat. But anyway, I just want to kind of start off here with Jenny. You elaborated on how your new supplier approval program requires cross-functional workflow with R&D, procurement, supplier, co-packer, QA. How has this changed since you have implemented TraceGains? Has there been measurable efficiencies identified?
I think it depends. Hi, thanks for the question, Bob. It depends on who you ask. In some cases, since we've been in TraceGains and collecting documents through the network, we've been able to turn projects around really quickly. In other cases, we've had some resistance from suppliers, and we spend a lot of time waiting for suppliers to get us documentation. We are working with our suppliers and our purchasing and R&D teams to try and help turn that time around. But if you were in an R&D position, I think someone in our company might say it slowed things down for them. They know what the status is now. The trigger of how we start projects is a little bit different. But in other cases, we turn things around within the same day. So it just depends on the project.
Okay, great. Megan, is that similar to what has occurred at Lassonde? How are these groups get this type of information, or did they previously?
It is somewhat similar. So we're doing the document workflows now, and that's kind of new to us. So we don't really have anything measurable, but I do have ideas on how we can expand them to kind of make things more efficient within our divisions. So like a approval workflow, for example, to maybe purchasing when an item's approved, they can get a notification that something they're waiting on is approved automatically, rather than us having to remember to go back and let them know, like, hey, this is finished.
Okay, great. Marcy, anything to add?
Sure. As a smaller company, just getting started with TraceGains this year, previous to this, everything we did was extremely manual. As Kaylee said, there was a lot of emailing documents back and forth between teams, and trying to get everybody access to the same information was a big challenge. So for us, it has been certainly a big improvement, and it has created a measurable decrease in the amount of time it takes us to collect all the documentation. Okay,
great. Another question, and this is for Megan. Megan, I know that Lassonde, I've been working with them for years, with Pierre Turner and the team. You've adopted the latest Spec Management application. How has that changed the way that specifications are authored and managed at this point?
In terms of authored and managed, we kind of kept the process similar to what we've done in our past system, but I feel like the workflow is more visible to everybody, which is really nice. Before in our system, we had shared specs, but it was kind of cumbersome and hard to figure out which specs were really shared amongst divisions. And with the spec management system, it's a lot easier to clearly see the data and reduce instances of duplication in the system. And I think that's great. But we are not, since we're kind of keeping it how we used to, we're not using the collaboration method with the suppliers right now. We're more relying on them accepting the spec, and if they want to decline it, to leave us any comments, and we're kind of handling issues that way.
Okay, great. Another question, this is for Marcy and the MegaFoods team. The story about the pandemic impact on your supply chain is, I find it fascinating. What would you have done if you didn't have TraceGains? I mean, how would you have new and existing products been affected?
So we were really rolling out TraceGains at the same time that a lot of our employees were shifting to working from home. So an issue that had previously been a small challenge in terms of getting teams all coordinated to make sure that all the steps of the SIDI approval process happen suddenly became a really critical challenge for us. We would have had a much harder time getting through all of the new ingredients that we needed to approve in a short amount of time. TraceGains really let us give everybody access to exactly the same information so that R&D could be doing their part, the lab could be doing their part, regulatory could be doing their part. All of the teams could be working simultaneously using the same documentation.
That's great. Another question for Kaylee. You all spoke really about audit readiness improvements. How has that changed the way plants prepare?
I would say it's really improved things because it's made everything much easier to find. And again, it's all in one place. And I spoke about how our old way, our packets were like these books of paper that were this big. And if, the organic certifier shows up at your door and says, hey, we want all the organic certificates for your ingredients. And you go, okay, give us a day. And now we just go right into the documents location and we can look up all the organic certificates at once. It's been fabulous.
Great, good deal. Jenny, have you seen improvements?
Yeah, we've actually used our dashboards for each of our plant locations as we prepare for their upcoming third-party audits with GFSI, organic audits like Kaylee talked about, even kosher inspections when they come by. We use our dashboards to look up the status of documentation to try to help us manage which suppliers we need to follow up with as we get prepared for those audits ahead of their arrival. And then, like Kaylee mentioned, it's easy to pull the document. You know which one is the most current or most up to date. It's all within TraceGains and easy to access for our sites.
Great. Megan, anything to add?
No, I definitely agree with everything that everyone else has said. All of our dashboards that I created in TraceGains were previously Excel spreadsheets, and the plants had to rely on making sure that someone did update all the information. So it's really great that it's live 24/7 in the system, so it's always up to date.
Great. And then the last question I have here, first of all, is are your procurement groups and R&D groups, are they benefiting from Market Hub? We hear success stories, but just curious how your organizations are changing the way they find candidate ingredients. Megan?
I don't have anything hard on how much they're benefiting from it, but I can see a difference in suppliers. So I'm in charge of setting up all of the suppliers for our company. I've noticed a decrease in ones that aren't in the system. So I do feel like our teams are looking there first to see if it's someone that we can easily get documentation from and work with, rather than someone we have to teach from scratch and try to convince them to get into the system.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it happens weekly that the growth is there. Jenny, anything to add?
We recently did a survey of our TraceGains users within Smucker and found we needed to take the time to do better training with our user base around Market Hub itself. And so through our user survey, identified the need for us to do internal communication around how we should use Market Hub and what really each role and responsibility within the organization, how they can benefit from it.
Great. Kaylee, Kat, or anyone from MegaFood?
As Kat spoke earlier, when we had a co-man who was looking for some documentation that we didn't quite have, I was able to go right into Market Hub and I was able to locate them easy as anything. And so just that benefit alone made it worth it. But we found some future suppliers that woohoo are already in TraceGains. And so that got us off on the right foot and getting the documentation ready for them.
Excellent. Okay, I'm just scanning through the chat, and Dana, help me if I haven't seen anything. I know that Aaron was asking about what Smucker is using for, I believe, the BE form. Now, if they're using the standard form or created or appended to what is in the standard forms package today.
We're using the standard form for suitability. We have had to ask for, even if we had a previously approved version of the suitability form, we have had to go back to suppliers and look for those BE questions that have been included in the update. Thank you to the user group for helping make sure that we have the most updated language in that suitability form, and the questions are really appropriate to the guidance that's been given around BE. We are just using the suitability form standard document, and then our regulatory team like to use the country of origin, again, the standard document, so that they can understand the use case of each of the ingredient inclusions and whether they do or don't need to declare it as part of a BE statement.
Okay, excellent. We have Dana, are there any other questions out there that you saw in the chat?
You know, there was a lot of discussion about contributing and collaborating with Smuckers on the BE forms.
Yes.
And Gary Walters, who's our VP of Customer Success, he suggested that anyone that's interested in participating in a discussion about that or collaborating on that, that they can email him at gary.walters@tracegains.com to join that discussion. And we can work with the folks at Smuckers to try to set up a session where we can foster some additional collaboration. I think that's where the, you know, kind of the primary threads that I was spotting in the chat. Does anybody else have any final thoughts? Great. Well, I'm going to invite our panelists then to, as long as the chat box is still open, feel free to answer any questions or dialogue further in the chat box. And then we'll reach back out and let you guys know about any further collaboration around the BE and other forms. Thank you for joining us.